Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Great. Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on best practices for ocean freight tenders, presented by Drewry Supply Chain Advisors, the logistics consultancy arm of Drewry. The webinar will be hosted by Chaz Deller, consultant at Drewry Supply Chain Advisors, whom I will introduce in a minute, and myself, Philippe Damas, head of Drewry Supply Chain Advisors. We run these Drewry open webinars based on what we have seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears in the market. It is not theory or fiction, it is hard, solid facts and experience. For example, Chaz, how many bids have you actually supported so far in your career?
Thanks, Philip, and thanks for the introduction. I think we're closing in on about 200 in the last 10 years, all BCO-dominated tenders. Even though, as you see, I worked for an NVO, we did a transparent bid process. So yeah, closing on a 200, probably up around the 800,000 TEU mark, something like that.
Great. The presentation part of this webinar will take about 35 minutes, followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. So I would invite anybody to enter any questions you have at any time in the questions box on your screen, and we'll endeavor to address as many questions as we can. All the participants in this webinar are BCOs, customers, and other BCO friends, and we look forward to sharing and discussing our experience and best practices with other professionals like you. Now, the agenda for today is shown here. We'll go through a quick introduction of the market context, and we'll go through a number of topics and questions which are typically relevant for ocean freight tenders best practices. And I will now introduce my colleague Chaz Deller. Chaz has over 45 years of experience in the global transportation sector and has worked on 4 continents: Europe, Africa, Asia, and currently North America. His specialist sector is global ocean and air freight. He's a well-known professional. He rose to become VP of Global Ocean Freight and later Global VP Ocean Freight Procurement at UTI Worldwide, now DSV. He has plenty of experience that he'll share with you, and Chaz is now a consultant with Drewry, specializing in our e-sourcing air and ocean freight solution. As for myself, Philippe Damas, I'm head of Drewry Supply Chain Advisors, 30 years of experience in container shipping, and I have advised BCOs on ocean freight procurement, benchmarking, e-sourcing, and new innovative techniques. First, I will start with a bit of market introduction. The market context for any company preparing to run or considering to run ocean tenders is complex, as this slide shows. The chart on the top left corner shows you the quarter-on-quarter change in BCO contract rates. And as you can see on the left, we previously had a long period of declining BCO contract rates, but there was a flipping point in approximately the 4th quarter of 16, where the contract rates then started to increase again. Now, if you look at the spot rates, the picture is rather different. This is based this time on the Drewry container freight rate insight. And the picture there is that there has been, between early 2016 and approximately August last year, a steady increase in spot rates. But since August, there was a weakness in the market. And finally, a third bit of market info we'd like to share with you is the result of this survey from the JOC, where, as you can see, 49% of BCOs expect their contract rates for the next contract season in the Trans-Pacific to go up by between 1 and 10%. So that's the context. Now, when planning or running an ocean procurement bid, what are the key questions and decisions for BCOs, Chaz?
Yeah, it's quite a bit. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. This is our second session today. We ran one earlier today for the European teams. You know, there's a concern that both sides will leave dollars on the table, but let's do first things first. Huh? As a BCO, let's get your most desirable outcome down on paper. And typically, you don't enter this fray alone, you're with the team. And make sure that the team understands what the goal is and what the strategy is to secure that MDO. So, leaving dollars on the table is always a concern for both sides. And from a BCO's perspective, you can limit that risk by awarding only 70% of your total global business at contract signing. Certainly offering your entire business worldwide at time of negotiation, but from an award perspective, 70%. So in the event that rates do decrease and your existing providers are not offering you those decreases without improving your service levels, then you can look at the spot market and take advantage. In addition, and perhaps more importantly, if you sign up with the exclusive Drury Benchmarking Club, you will always be aware of what your peers are paying on your specific trade lanes, along with the spot rate market information. So I think that's the first thing to get sorted. Second, really, is what if the providers change the service levels? And tell me, Philip, last 2 years, those service levels have changed dramatically with all the alliance changes. You've got some more coming up in April. Probably just after Chinese New Year, we'll see the full flow of one. And it's one of the biggest risks that we have to address. You know, I'm not sure that any carrier has 2020 vision and can predict what might happen a year out. So there you are signing an agreement, and I don't think either party is 100% sure of what service levels would be 6 or 9 months down the line. However, when you do sign an agreement, you make commitments, and you make those commitments against certain transit times, certain ports of exit and arrival, against particular strings, determining the frequency and the transit time, etc. So make sure you write those into your contractual agreement as soon as you've made your decisions. That way you can put a clause in the contract that commits your carriers into providing that specific service level that you paid for. And your team has obviously got to support it globally within your organization. Use who you have decided to use. But in the event of change, you should now be able to decrease your MQC on those lanes that are impacted by any carrier that has changed the service level and perhaps switched to an alternative service. But of course, you would then want to lower your MQC accordingly on those lanes that are being impacted. So that's what happens if you have a service change during the midterm. Now, what if my volumes decrease or increase? Okay, right at the start, do your research internally. Never overcommit in terms of volumes. As we said earlier, commit only 70%. And hey, if your volumes after a period of time are going to increase substantially, then recognize that fact. This is additional leverage. And from a procurement perspective, more volume equals another opportunity to do perhaps a mini bid on the additional volumes, as you now can aggregate that volume and leverage accordingly. Hey, and some people say to us, let me sign for a shorter period. Let me do 6 months. Huh? Well, look, on some trade lanes globally, there are substantial swings in price every year. Take Asia, Latin America, for example. You go from $2,000 down to $500 within a couple of months. But nevertheless, the best option on service contract critical lanes is to commit 12 months. And if you need to adopt an interim strategy on some smaller lanes that are more fragile in terms of price, then you can do so. Now, how do I even begin to understand the impact of all those changes and alliances? And look, I read an awful lot and I study this stuff. And it's one of the biggest questions we get asked. What's the impact of the different alliances? Who's on whose alliance this week? That's what it's been like for the last couple of years. And keeping track of those changes over the last 2 years means you have to dedicate both yourself and your team to keeping abreast of those changes. That means study. Study brings you detailed knowledge. And almost every major presentation that you've seen from shipping lines and every major publication on shipping I've seen over the last 2 years has at least one alliance slide. So the questions you and your team have to ask your providers in the RFI portion, and we recommend you put the RFI in a yes/no questions, not a 37-page write-up of them. Ask them specific questions about how they're going to manage your business and what they're doing within a particular alliance. So the question you and your team have to ask is on-time performance, transit time, exit port, arrival port, terminal names. And also ask, are there going to be any changes after we commit? Oh, and get that detail in writing in your contractual agreement. So in the event of failure on the part of your provider to not provide the service that you've paid for, happily, you can switch to an alternative carrier and reduce your MQC with the initial carrier. You know, Philip, it was a couple of years, nearly 3 years ago, that Drury predicted the demise of a couple of Korean carriers. And that Z-score index that I certainly paid and looked at every single month when I was making decisions on behalf of UTI, it was really important to understand how my carrier is set financially. And that Z-score index shows you NVOs as well as public ocean carriers. You'll be able to see their financial status, and goodness knows, it's a darn sight easier doing that than having your financial team wade through pages and pages of Dun & Bradstreet reports. It takes forever. But this is about differentiation, isn't it? Between one carrier provider and another. And in my book, differentiation comes with the term value. Well, what makes up value? It's not just the competitiveness. It's about being able to evaluate your KPIs, confidence, reliability, transit times, provider's management team. Are they willing to build a long-term relationship? Did they go that extra mile to look after you? And did they design their day-to-day process around your needs? Are they willing to build a long-term relationship so that they're the ones you pick the phone up to first in times of stress? Valuable relationship is one where the provider will want to keep you ahead of the curve on all aspects of your business and to make sure that you know of any and all changes first and not have to read about it in publications. You know, I saw a message the other day from a carrier that said, oh, extremely sorry, and this was 2 days after the event, we failed to call at Charleston this week. So what are some of the best practices, Philip, in service contracting or rate agreement negotiations? How do I improve my provider relationships during this difficult period? We're coming up to TP Eastbound, right? So everybody's really trying to understand what's going to come down the pipe.
Sorry, okay. So we have quite a number of US and South America-based BCOs. They will be asking themselves, will their contract strategy be different this year versus last year? What do you suggest on this, Charles?
You know, what we saw in 2016 and 17, right, in those ocean negotiations, they were clearly biased towards the BCO. And goodness knows, none of us want another Hanjin. That was an absolute disaster for the entire world in terms of shipping. So I don't believe we're going to be seeing massively lower port-to-port costs than in previous years on any trades. But I think the way that we have to watch this is coming to that wake-up call. And in my opinion, timing is everything, and timing is everything in life, really. So pick the time when you're going to do your contract that works for you. Your last year's strategy may not work. You may need to tweak it. You may need to change it. You may need to adjust it. And when it comes to analyzing data, I think this is much more complex than it has been before. So make sure you have an optimization tool on hand to do the analytics. It's really important. We use the Kilvar tool, but we've also done bids where we've used the BCO's own optimization tools or service. But I think the thing going into the bid, it's a lengthy process. Typically for many BCOs, it's a 60 to 90-day process. If you're a couple of 3,000 lane IDs, different container sizes, many global origins and destinations. And the issue, I think, is going to be this. There's less choice because of the consolidations. And typically in business, when there's less choice, you pay more. I've seen a huge number of GRI notices on almost every trade, but specifically on TP, both eastbound and westbound. But when you see a GRI notice on your email there for $1,000 a 40-foot, it's all geared up to do one thing, and that, of course, is to improve the carrier's financial position. For the $1,000 extra, do you get a better service? So make sure when you're sorting out your timing here that you pick your time. It's the number one strategy in service contracting. Choose the time that's best for you. Pick the time of the year that is not peak. Don't be doing a bid in the middle of Chinese New Year or the week before TP eastbound contracts are meant to be renewed. I would go for the softer period of the year. Late fall, early winter. Fourth quarter is typically better than any other time.
Great, thank you. Now, another question, particularly for trans-Pacific shippers who are starting to prepare their tender process. What do they need to do internally when preparing their tenders?
Yeah, that's a great question. You've really got to know your product market and your business. It's really important that you understand where your volumes are coming from and to, what your projected increases or decreases in volumes are, that you design, your template and your cost models around your MDO. After all, that's the most desirable outcome that you want, so design it accordingly. But know your product market and your business. Know what's happening in that marketplace and make yourself known to those providers at a senior level. I've spent many hours in carriers' headquarters in Taiwan, in Korea, in China, in Copenhagen, in Hamburg, in Marseille, making sure that they understood who we were and what part that provider could play in our supply chain and our customers' supply chains, and making sure that they know what we're about, what our values are. But understand and research all the current services and providers in your market. Spend that time, do as much research as you possibly can, and aim to know more than the guy coming in to meet you about his own organization. You have to negotiate from strength. You have to negotiate in any battle from a position of strength. And review those rates and the financial risk of the providers, and then make sure you're using a bidding tool. You can manage all that big data. We just finished a bid recently, 675,000 pieces of data in round one, and we'd actually reduced that from about 1.7 million pieces of data that typically would be there. And to try and do that stuff manually, no. You have to be able to use a bidding tool in order to analyze all that data. Do the research. Don't go into battle alone. That's the message.
Great. Okay, moving on. Are there golden rules or really big recommendations when running an ocean bid for BCOs?
Yeah, there are what I call 5 golden rules for BCOs. Whilst we want to be the hero, right, and save money here, nobody's going to thank you if you save $200 a container and your selection has the container sitting in Shanghai for 2 weeks and arrives 3 weeks late, just because you chase the dollars and not the value. So make sure you get that timing right. Avoid peak season. Don't be doing a bid in the middle of July. It sends the wrong message, and you'll hear a different message. Use the softer period of the year, use the Drury data to understand the market, and then benchmark or index your current rates with the marketplace. Understand where you sit so that you can strategize to get to that MDO with success. Combine all your volume. Put the whole thing globally in one bid. Don't bow to the trade lane specific requirements of ocean carriers like, oh no, we're only going to do TP eastbound right now. Put in 100% of your global volume. But hey, just commit 70% at contract time. And make sure you give each of those awarded carriers a really good forecast. And don't be doing, oh, we moved 2,000, so 2,000 divided by 50 is X number per week. Business is not like that. It does have ups and downs. So make sure you're giving your providers a really good forecast that's real. Fix your base rates for 12 months. I think it's absolutely critical. Don't allow carriers to have subject to GRI or subject to peak season surcharge clause or any other surcharges. Insist on a no new surcharge clause. And when it comes to fuel, and you'll have noticed the fuel's increased, 48%, I think, over the last 9 months, 380 fuel anyway, the ones that the ocean carriers use. Allow it to float quarterly, certainly not monthly. If it's advantageous for you, include the BAF in the base rate. But I think you'll probably want to plot what the changes are in BAF. Right now, probably about 4% of your landed transportation costs on a free in to free out basis. Total cost, 4% increase in fuel in the first quarter, projected to go even higher. When it comes to selection, select a primary and secondary carrier in each alliance. Absolutely critical. Spread so that you can get at least 3 sailings from Asia to US in 1 week. Your suppliers will love you for that. And pick your niche carriers if needed. And here's a critical one, and is becoming really, really important. Make sure you get that free time button down, the detention and demurrage. Make sure you understand what you need. So many companies we work with are not sure how many days they need, and they say, oh, we need 10. Make sure, do a study up front. Make sure you understand, because guess what? That is part of your price. And again, you go and spend, or you save $200 a container on the ocean, and somebody lets a container sit, and guess what? Your savings just flew out the window because somebody didn't pay attention to detention and demurrage. So it's really critical. Those are certainly the 5 golden rules, Philip.
Great, okay. And for the BCOs who are currently members of the benchmarking club, a reminder, we'll have a special webinar on detention and demurrage management. Okay, thank you very much for this. So now we're going to move to some cost elements. So bid sheets, as everybody knows on this call, are complex in any manual or e-sourcing event, but which cost elements should the BCOs include in their bid sheet?
Yeah, and for this we're going to use the great slides that Ginochi put together when we did our USC Marshall presentation back in August at USC. I'm in favor of round 1, 4 buckets, 4 per container cost buckets. Group the pre-carriage from door origin up to and onboard the vessel, or aircraft if you're doing an air freight bid. It's the same, the elements. Then look at the port-to-port or airport-to-airport costs and include the fuel here. No reason not to. You really want round 1 where you may have as many as 12 or 13 providers bidding. Let's reduce the amount of complexity and group it all together in cost buckets. The third one really is about the destination costs as it lands, terminal handling costs, things like that. Perhaps the detention, demurrage, and chassis fees. Yeah, don't forget about chassis fees. And then finally, that destination delivery cost to your customer's door. And that may be an internal customer as well as a direct customer. But for round 1, Make those 4 buckets per container. You can do bill of lading costs, which is a per shipment cost separately. It's not a problem. But typically, if you're booking directly with an ocean carrier online, the bill of lading cost is minimal. So those are the 4 elements we would put in round 1. You can always expand it later once you reduce the number of people you have in the bid.
Great. How about managing the expectations of your business internally, and how do you determine target rates?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? How do we manage it internally? You've really got to discuss and agree early on the expectations of any cost changes with your team. Make sure your senior management understand what's going to happen with fuel, what the trending are. You can look at Platts or you can look at Bunker World. You can't use the Trans-Pacific Stabilization Agreement website anymore. They don't show what the carrier BAF is. So do your research, understand that if fuel on 380 is going up, typically that will mean an increase in fuel. And understand the service changes. Understand what terminal is that going to come to. Your trucker would really like to know what terminal his containers are going to arrive at that he's going to do. Simply, is there going to be chassis available? What times are they open? Is there additional charge after hours? All these sorts of things. Understand what those changes might be coming forward, and then use the benchmark as data from Drury before and during your tender. It's really important. Those are some of the things that really you've got to make sure that your team are aware of.
Great. You mentioned earlier that the whole process could take 60 to 80 days or sometimes longer.
Absolutely.
But how can a BCO shorten the elapsed time and the man days spent on managing an event?
Yeah, well, I think anybody who knows me probably knows that I'm a stickler for getting the thing done on time, and I pride myself on that. We just finished the bid in record time, 32 days, start to finish, 15,000 TEU globally. It can be done. You better have a plan at the start. You better have a project plan that specifies the dates and have everybody on your team aware of that. But typically for some larger BCOs, this is more than a 60-day process. So the way we look at it to start with, we will do an audit through our e-sourcing Oceanfreight solution. We'll map and measure the current services that you're using. We'll look at them in terms of how the rates sit, how the service level sits, what portions given to which carrier, and look at that mix in terms of the new alliances. And then we'll design with you the best sourcing optimization that you can do. You're going to be wanting to look at historic costs versus your new costs from round 1, round 2, and the finalization in round 3 before the award. You're going to want to look at how they sit against your target rates, and I'll come on to that in a second. But basically, we're going to design and manage that sourcing event from start to finish. As I said, typically 3 rounds. We will also accompany you on the face-to-face meetings with those providers. So you've got assistants in the room in order to understand or extract additional information from those providers. Once you've made the awards, and all those decisions are yours, of course, we'll help you design the contract. And I may have said it before, we typically use the BIMCO Service Con contract if you don't want to use the shipping line contract. You can put all your terms and conditions in there, and it's ratified by the European Shippers Council and the Federal Maritime Commission. It's a perfectly good way to put a common standard across all contracts so that it's on one format. We do the face-to-face meetings, we run the KPIs, and then your decisions. Make those decisions. After we've done the contracts, we will monitor those contracts. We'll make sure that the KPIs are written into the agreement. And then 90 days out, after you've made the awards, we will help you manage the first QBR. And I think the point of all of this is to help you train for the next event, but also to measure, to make sure that all the things that you were promised are actually happening. So we help on implementation and execution.
Okay. And you mentioned the duration of the process from the time you would open a tender for, say, medium or large BCO to awarding the volumes. What would you say is a realistic time scale using
45,
this type of processes?
45 days is what we've typically seen. Depends on how many rounds you want to go, but to get the right result, if you're a fairly larger size BCO, yeah, 45 days. And of course, the optimization tool takes out so much time of the analytics. It also makes sure that the providers adhere to your instructions, filling in the right columns. And we'll talk about some of that in the next couple of slides.
Okay, great. Right. If I can just say, we received a few questions concerning this that we'll deal later on. If you have any questions, everybody, feel free to enter them. That's part of this exchange. Now, are there things that the providers can do better? Are there any golden rules for the providers, Chaz?
Yeah, and for those again who know me, we once sat in an office in Singapore watching one after another shipping line come in, give the same presentation. 27 slides. Your name appears on slide number 1 as a BCO, and it fails to appear on any other slide, and it's all about them. It's an absolute essential, and why we're talking about this to BCOs is because you really have to train the providers on what it is you want to hear. Maybe some of your senior management are going to join your face-to-face meetings. You've got to help that provider look his best. So from the provider's perspective, show a desire to be part of the customer supply chain, do your research about them, and you're becoming part of their supply chain and part of the solution. So design those solutions around the customer's needs. Be very specific when you're presenting. Understand the customer's business. I once had one carrier who did a huge amount of research on the customer that they were coming in to talk to, and it really went down well. Now, fact is, their rates were a little bit higher, but nevertheless, they scored first on one of the KPIs, which talks about management and interest in our organization. They did a great job. And make sure the carrier's organization understands the bid process. Have the right people on your team at every level. Be innovative here. If it's a global customer, Mr. Shipping Line, then design bundled pricing or reuse of equipment. Offer incentives for that. If you don't have to take the container back to the terminal and you're looking at door rates, that's $150 saving right there in each direction. So if you're inbound and outbound customer, then work on matchbacks and take the price on your bottom line and nobody else's. Important for shipping line to show performance criteria. I read today a recent study, I think it's Cargo Smart, Philip. They said the global on-time performance of carriers was 69%. That's pretty darn poor. Maybe on
You'd get fired in an organization for getting that.
I think so. It's like turning up for work only 6 days out of 10, isn't it? As we say, we never close, but it's 69%. That is pretty darn poor. And we're coming up to Chinese New Year, so it's only going to get worse. So I think button down that performance criteria. If you're going to spend your dollars with somebody who promised you that 21-day transit time or that 25-day transit time into Charleston, something like that, make sure they can prove that with historical facts, please. Again, shipping lines need to compare themselves. Everybody knows what the rates are out there. It's well known. Just turn up the Drury data or turn the back page of Journal of Commerce magazine. You'll find out what the spot market rate is, not the BCO market rate, but the spot rates nominated there. So no excuse for a shipping line not to understand where their numbers sit. Or the guy who bows out after round 1 because he was $500 too high. So, Mr. Shipping Line, be proactive and double check your data. The bid we just finished, I reckon 40% error rating. Now, you can minimize that with an optimization tool and a tool to do the bid through, because now you're forcing the carriers to put correct data in. But when you see a $10,000 freight rate when it should be $1,000, it's really elementary errors that we're seeing. And Philip, this is the worst I've seen in the last 3 years. So anybody looking to do a TP eastbound bid now, whilst it's relatively simple, make sure the data is correct, Mr. Shipping Line. There's nothing worse than incorrect data. Provide that reliable data throughout and show the technological connectivity. It's a big thing right now. This adds value. It shouldn't have to be where the customer is finding out 3 days after the event that the ship didn't arrive at Charleston. Goodness me. But really, Mr. Shipping Line, you want to win? Be a difference maker. Implement fully when you get the business and make sure the customer knows you're looking after them. So those are some of the rules that I think should be golden rules for any provider, be they ocean carrier or even NVO.
Great. Well, Chaz, you provided here some very practical and I think tremendous insight into best practices. This brings us to the end of our side of the presentation, but we do have some time to take the questions you have sent. So thank you very much for sending the questions. Before I start this, I also want to highlight that Chaz will also be speaking at 2 events pretty soon, organized in cooperation with the JOC and TPM. So if you're there, Chaz would love to meet you. But now we'll turn to the questions. And maybe I've got a question for you, Chaz. What can we do to ensure good pricing without risk of containers being rolled?
Yeah, isn't it funny, eh? You get the same question every year on every single trade lane. You know, it's like it's the worst fear that you have. You get that email first thing in the morning that says 10 of your 16 urgent containers didn't get on board. You know, we go back to the planning, right, and the relationship, and also make sure that you give that tremendous forecast. And you know what? There's penalties. There's penalties for people who don't do what they say they're going to do in a contractual arrangement for both sides. So at the end of the day, there has to be some compensation your way in the event that containers don't make the ship after 14 days advance booking or after 2 or 3 months of pre-shipment information, etc. Look, we all have dreadful weather forecast situations. We have storms and things like that, and it does happen. We know that. But typically the BCO is living or dying by that container arriving on time and the carriers that he's selected performing and adhering to what they promised. So no, let's not be looking at rolled containers or the shipping line coming in and saying, well, for another few $100, we can get you on board. That should never be the case. If you're building that long-term relationship, that's not the sort of phone call you want to take.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question, how much time do you allow suppliers for each round in the bidding process?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Look, many of these carriers these days are doing these bids offshore from the US, that is. And I must admit the quality isn't that good at all. So what we do is we send a video to each of the providers up front telling them how to do the bid. And this eliminates at least 50% of the dumb questions, and I'll say that. What does BAF mean? Huh? So we get some pretty strange questions. I would say if you're in a 3,000 lane ID situation, 14 working days for round one is sufficient. I give a 24-hour in advance of that for the RFI questions. And once they've given the yes/no answers to the RFI, they get access to the RFQ. They don't get access to the RFQ without completing the yes/no RFI questions. So 14 days, round one, certainly. 7 days, round two.
Okay, thank you. I have a number of questions. There's one, perhaps, which I could answer. Just 1 second. As a smaller BCO, about 1,000 TEUs, what is the recommendation on how many providers to use for shipping lines NVOs? And then I'd like to say, we at Drury are very aware that the small BCOs are often unable to get good contracts with ocean carriers because they do not have the scale. And we're also aware that they are frankly not getting rates which are as attractive of the large BCOs. So we are working on a new solution to help BCOs have better rates and better conditions. So we will make an announcement very soon, but I'd like to pause on this, please.
Yeah, I think the other thought on this, Philip, is even if you're at 1,000, you're going to need 3 sailings a week, and spread the risk, spread it across the 3 alliances. You know, pick something in Ocean, pick something in 2M, pick something in the alliance. Get you that flow of freight. Nobody wants 20 containers arriving on one ship. At a terminal that's perhaps got potential union issues down the line, or is a delayed terminal that doesn't have a good record. So spread that risk, spread where the freight is coming into. If you're coming into LA Long Beach, you know, you can quite easily spread it across the different alliances there. That to me is the best strategy. So if it's 1,000 or 10,000, same strategy, primary carrier in each alliance.
So that's 3 to 6 providers.
3 primary, and then you want to create the competition. So yes, pick some smaller guys as well. And if you're working with an NVO, then typically they do have already those agreements in place. And NVOs typically take care of their customers a little bit more closer in terms of supply chain needs on a door-to-door basis than an ocean carrier. So a smaller one typically would need that. But again, no reason for you not to be able to tell your NVO, look, I need 3 sailings a week. They can do that.
Okay. We have several questions on bidding tools and optimization tools, asking A, which tools we use, and B, which we recommend.
Yeah.
Just we try and answer that.
We'll try and answer that the best we can. You know, I think during the bid process in the last 10 years, I've used every single tool known to man in doing bids, both from an NVOCC perspective, entering bids there, and also seeing what the customer uses. There's a tremendous growth in artificial intelligence, a tremendous growth in technological advancements in bidding. We don't like to call these auctions, for goodness sake. It's not the way we approach it. So we use typically the Kilvar tool, based in Southern Ireland. We've worked with them. They're very flexible. At the same time, we've also worked with GT Nexus. That's a more rigid structure, very well known to many people. So no matter what tool there is there, we can actually work with any tool that's made available to us by the BCO. But let's make sure that you get the rules up front. How many scenarios are you going to want to look at? You don't want to be doing 25 scenarios just because somebody wants an extra one late in the day. Get those scenarios written up front so that you can compare real data.
Great, okay. And I think we've got time for one more question. Chaz, you mentioned the BIMCO contract. And the question here is, do the carriers accept the BIMCO contracts, or do they insist on their own boilerplates?
In the last 12 months, not one single rejection. They all accepted the BIMCO contract. And look, you know, Philip, I think it's 254 euros. Go onto the website of BIMCO, choose that. It's an extremely low cost way of doing it. And I don't know anybody who's got a maritime lawyer sitting next to them to go through all these clauses, conditions. Keep the clauses simple. Put in your performance clauses to make sure that you've got an ability to withdraw that MQC if the service doesn't come up to what you've agreed on, and standardize it. It's a Word document. You can type in your own stuff, put in what I would consider to be a reasonable penalty, say $25 a TEU, maximum $25 a TEU. Put in an MQC that's 70% of your total volume that you're going to award that carrier. Put in the 10 performance clauses that you want to. And we have not had one single issue with the BIMCO contract by 8 different shipping lines.
Great, okay. And of course, we at Drewry are independent consultants. We are vendor neutral, so what we tell you is not driven by any alliance or ownership. It's what we know from our experience.
Absolutely. The customer chose the BIMCO solution, correct?
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, I think we've reached the time allocated. I'm sure everybody is busy. So I would just like to say thank you very much for the BCOs providing questions and feedback. If you have any more questions, feel free to contact us at Drury Supply Chains with questions or any requests for help or any comments or questions. And we will be sending out a link to a recording of this broadcast if you or a colleague hasn't had time to join all of it, with a summary of the questions and answers. So I would like, with Chas, to thank you very much for your participation, and please do not hesitate to contact us again. Thank you once again, and we look forward to your participation at future Drury events.
And look forward to seeing you all at TPM. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.